It's time again to break down, discuss, and analyze some of Africa's important social, cultural, and political issues. Here, we connect the dots on how certain issues affect us from Nigeria to Kenya to South Africa to Rwanda across the continent. We look to put solutions on the table. I'm Tolulokwe Adela Balogun, and this is NC Debrief. Today, we're looking at addressing period poverty in Africa. Don't forget that you can be part of the conversation by using the hashtag NC Debrief. Now, to get into this issue, I have Carol Omu. She is the founder of Sanitary Aid Initiative Nigeria and works with communities to improve the quality of life for women and children. And she joins us from London, England. I also have Bertha Tobias. Bertha is an African Union Youth Charter country representative and a youth leader who's joining us from Windhoek, Namibia. So what exactly is period poverty? It is the inability to access sanitary products due to financial constraints. Action Aid has expanded the definition to include the welfare and well-being of the women and girls' education affected by this inability to access standard sanitary products. It is a worldwide problem. According to UNICEF, every day, approximately 800 million women and girls are on their periods. Yet 1/3 of this number do not have access to clean water, female-friendly, decent and private toilets, hygiene facilities, and sanitary materials to manage menstruation with dignity. Carol, let me start with you. We can put all the paper definitions we like, we can do all the research we like, but those 800 million are women and girls in our towns and cities. Now, your initiative works in this space. When it comes to the issue of period poverty, what experiences have women and girls shared with you?
Thank you for having me, Tolu. So in Nigeria, the rough numbers are closer to 6 to 10 million girls not having access to menstrual hygiene products. And these girls are primary school girls, secondary school girls, girls from different parts of the country. When Sanitary Aid started, we met girls, or we still meet girls who the pack of pads that we give them is the first pack of pads they've ever had in their lives. We have girls we had this little community that there were reports about where girls saw using pads as a thing of prestige, that they were looking to older men to give them money so that at the time of the month they will have access to pads. And then you have people in abject poverty who do not prioritize pads at all. And there's also the issue and the gap of menstrual hygiene education, because there's people who can maybe afford pads but don't even know the best way to manage their periods. So that's one of the things that we try to do with Sanitary Aid Initiative. We try to prioritize giving products, but also ensuring that menstrual hygiene education is available to girls from low-income homes, girls in IDP camps. I mean, if you think about it, when you go to IDP camps or orphanages, most times people think about food and clothing and all of that. We don't necessarily think about the menstrual hygiene for girls, and the cost for that is expensive. If the average person or 80 million people in Nigeria are living under $2, $1 a day, where's a young girl going to see 600 naira to buy a pack of pads?
Very true. All right, so Bertha, talk to us about the situation in Namibia. There was, of course, the points where we had reports, different research has been done that looks at reports, as Carol just said now, that women and girls are looking to older men. They're looking to men and selling sex in order to afford sanitary products. What choices are they being forced to make because of period poverty in Namibia?
Right. Thank you so much for having me, Tolu. So the problem really is, and I think I also want to frame this conversation within the context of the shame that is attached to menstruation, culturally, socially, and politically, because that is really a major issue that does lead to and catalyze period poverty, right? So the inability to openly talk about pads or tampons or menstrual cups as openly as we talk about soap or toothpaste is in part the kind of culture that trickles into our legislative framework, into the policies that are available to make sanitary products accessible to women. And that is essentially something that also drives period poverty then, on top, obviously, of just general socioeconomic inaccessibility, right? So particularly the situation in Namibia is not significantly different from lots of other African countries, and by extension, lots of countries all over the world as well, right? So there are young girls in Namibia who are constantly unable to access basic menstrual products every month, and they're forced to resort to things like using a piece of cloth. Many of them just don't go to school at all because they can't, menstruate at school, because, there's also a shame attached to that, and it's also just generally undignifying. So a lot of young people have resorted to different means. There's constantly efforts, typically by civil society organizations, and people who are just, pooling resources and mobilizing people together to donate those products, but not much has been done. We did recently, however, we were recently successful as far as policy formulation and implementation is concerned, where the tax, on you've probably heard of it.
Yes, we're gonna get into that.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm excited to get into that, but that's a significant stride that we've taken as Namibians in the right direction. And all of that was championed by young women, young Namibian women, civil society organizations, a young, robust MP, Emma Theophilis. And yeah, really, it's bad, but not all hope is lost in Namibia.
All right, so we will touch on what African countries are doing in terms of addressing period poverty. But Carol, Bertha brings up an interesting aspect, which was my next question, and that is the cultural and the social dimensions of this conversation. People aren't scared of seeing blood or talking about blood until it's about menstruation. People can talk about a lot of things, but they don't want to talk about periods. And many communities do not speak openly or freely about menstruation, so it's even harder for people to admit that they can't afford to manage it. Now, this leads to the fear, the shame that happens to young girls. And as Bertha said, instead of even attempting to manage, they'll just sit at home. There are more girls on the continent who actually miss school because of menstruation than a number of other issues. What can we do to destigmatize menstruation and the conversations around it so we can start to address these issues?
It's so the question you've asked is very important, because it's just so important for us to keep talking about it. I think that even when we started, I didn't know the magnitude of the problem. Even till now, it's hard to wrap your head around how stigmatized girls often are, how much it's not normal to show blood like that, on how even just in popular discourse, it's not normal to talk about your periods, or you go to buy your pads and you have to double the nylon so that nobody knows you're on your period. And it has adverse effects, because there's girls being shamed who are hiding what they're going through, who don't even know, because you start to feel like it's a plague, like you're the only one going through it. And almost all girls are having periods. So why is that something that's shameful? But one of the things that's so important is that we continue to talk about it. A lot of people need to introduce these conversations quite early on in their families, to their domestic workers. Somebody the other day sent a message saying, "Oh, it's good. I just thought about this initiative, and I said I should ask my maid at home what she uses, because it's not something we've paid attention to." And to find out that she uses old rags,
Wow.
So these conversations need to be had everywhere. And issues like this that women, go through should be at the forefront of our conversation. The price of pads should be discussed the way we talk about, increasing price of food inflation, everything. It was this inflation that led to us starting sanitary aid, because we're like, if pads were 150 years ago, now it's 500, 600 naira. You need to talk about it. You need to let girls know that what's happening to them is normal. And opening those avenues for this conversation leads you to learning more about reproductive health.
Yeah.
I remember that when we started, we went to a school, and the girls, one of the frequently asked questions till now is girls saying, "I see my period twice a month. Is there something wrong with me?" Because nobody has told them how to calculate their menstrual cycle. Nobody has told them that this is normal, this can happen, what to do when you're in pain. And all the myths from, how early you see your period, how late, how irregular your period is, different conversations that we're not having that have long-term effects when you don't know about it. So menstruation is not an issue.
Yeah.
It's a normal bodily function, and we need to speak about it like that. I'm going to use the bathroom. We need to normalize it. We need to have bathrooms that have pads, because it's something that can happen. You can get stained in public even if you've plotted your menstrual cycle properly. So we need a society that thinks about this just as we think about everything that concerns wash facilities and everything. But again, you need to remember that our country has a very serious open defecation issue and all of these things. So while we're trying to solve all of these things, we need to prioritize the things that also concern women and menstruation and menstrual education and, all of that. And not just educating girls that, don't be shy. It's also educating boys that there's nothing wrong with this. And this is something that could happen around you. And this is, what you do, and just involvement in shaping and reshaping our society.
All right, so this is the point where we're going to take a break. And it's interesting we're having this conversation about period poverty. A lot of people don't know there's even hygiene poverty, when because of your financial constraints, it's even difficult for the toothpaste, for the toilet paper, for the soap, the things that keep hygiene. And of course, as Carol has said, it's even part of a larger conversation about sexual and reproductive health and rights. But as we take this break, think about it. What are African countries doing to address this issue? It might surprise you what initiatives have come about. We'll talk about it when we return. Now, here are some stats for this part of the convo. UNESCO says 1 in 10 African girls misses school because they don't have access to sanitary products or because there aren't safe private toilets to use. In Kenya, approximately 50% of school-age girls do not have access to sanitary products. According to research by the World Bank Initiative, Water Supply, Sanitation and Hygiene, WASH, in Nigeria, 25% of women lack adequate privacy for defecation or menstrual hygiene management. Now, there are countries that are doing something about this. Recently, Namibia removed tax on sanitary products, now known as the tampon tax or period tax. This is something that has come about. Bertha, you did mention this a bit earlier, so just quickly run us through, how did this happen, particularly with Namibia now?
So one, I'm very proud, but two, also the way that started was, so for years, actually, there have been different civil society organizations in Namibia that have been working towards making sanitary products more accessible for Namibian women in general. And this year, I believe it was on March the 3rd, where the current Deputy Minister of Information and Communication Technology in Namibia, who's also one of the youngest members of parliament on the African continent and in the world, Emma Theophilis, tabled that motion again. Although it was tabled previously in Parliament, I think she revived, on a policy formulation and implementation level, that urgency through tabling that motion. It was then approved, and the rest is history. The tampon tax has been removed, and it will be effective from the financial year of 2022/2023 in Namibia. So it was a 15% rate, I believe, which now Namibian women no longer have to pay, which is a huge step in the right direction.
Okay, you said it's a huge step in the right direction. Carol, Namibia joins Ethiopia that removed customs duties. Kenya and Rwanda removed sales tax. South Africa removed VAT. Nigeria stopped sales tax on locally made MHM products. And Mauritania removed an unspecified tax. Bertha is saying this is a step in the right direction. Do you think it's enough to remove customs duties and taxes to address the issue of period poverty?
So she's right about it being a step in the right direction. But my opinion is we have a larger problem of poverty. So imagine a pack of pads at 600 naira and taking out 60 naira. For the average person and the people that we talk about when we talk about period poverty, that is not as significant as having access to, say, free pads or to pads in public spaces and all of that. So while it is a step, in Nigeria, our tax, I believe, is between 5 or 10%. It's not as significant for us and for a population where up to 80 million are living below the poverty line. I don't know if that's makes so I feel like
it does make sense, because there's the conversation around removing the tax and making sure that it's free, period, and that makes it easier for many women and girls. But we'll get into that. But very quickly, there's often a demographic that's overlooked in these conversations. And Carol, I'll take this question back to you again. What are the efforts in terms of including women in prisons and women and girls with special needs in underprivileged or underserved areas? What's the work being done in regards to that when it comes to this conversation around period poverty?
So a lot of the work around period poverty in Nigeria is done by non-profit organizations. So it's great to hear that other African countries have like a government getting involved, and it's part of a larger conversation about women's representation in government. And if there are more women, more younger people, then we begin to have policies that think about women and think about younger people. Our organization, Sanitary Initiative, has gone to a couple of prisons. There's an initiative I learned about in, I think, Benue State, where the women there are learning to make reusable pads by themselves, and they are selling it and then using it themselves. But we target low-income areas and we target IDP camps, and also by extension, we also target like homes where there are people living with special needs and disabilities and all of that. But we cannot non-profit or NGO our way out of certain issues. There's a lot of issues that we need more government involvement. So while non-profit organizations are fundraising, partnering with private organizations and doing all of this, I don't think that it's enough or that it is as substantial as when we have the government saying that this is something affecting half of our population. Half of our population is women, and a great percentage of our population does not have money. So how are they having, how are they managing their periods every month? And you must think about period poverty as an issue that cannot be solved once, like hunger or like, having access to shelter. If you have your period this month, you're going to have it next month. So the fact that you get a free sanitary pad this month is not sustainable enough to solve the problem next month. Then you begin to think about the sustainable options and the stigma around the sustainable options, because you must think about how we were using old rags in the olden days, and then we started to use pads, and we started to use the disposable pads that a lot of people are using thousands of. The average person would use 10,000 single pads by the time they've lived through their lives.
Yeah. And
also think about what this does to the environment, which is another longer conversation about why we need to be focusing on reusable options, not because of poverty, not because of, but part of the stigma involved in telling people that, okay, I think you should begin to think about how do you manage this despite not having money, and how do you manage this as in a way that's better for the environment? How do you manage this in a way that's better for yourself and all of that? So I think it's just a really large conversation that is so large that individuals cannot carry and say we're going to solve period poverty, that we need our government that we pay taxes to get more involved in solving it.
So let's take a break, but we will talk about governments coming in, because on the continent, some governments have pushed back on making sanitary products completely free, saying that they simply cannot afford to do that. We'll find out what our guests think after the break. Now, some African governments have made moves towards providing sanitary products for free, but unfortunately have not followed through. Some cite a harsh economic climate, and others say they remove tax on local products in order to encourage local production. So, Carol and Bertha, I'm putting this question to you. What do you think of this defense for not removing taxes or for not making it free, as it might be, that the countries, the economies, some of these economies on the continent simply can't afford to provide sanitary products for free? Let me start with you, Bertha.
Right. So I feel very strongly about this, right? And that's because I while obviously considering economic constraints, particularly in a pandemic, it's also important to be honest about the fact that we prioritize what we think is important. And many times those national priorities are reflected in national allocations of funding and in the national budget. So I would argue that there's many other things as well that you can consider cutting, but this is a basic, essential. It should be a non-negotiable. The same way we prioritize food, and the same way we make sure that people live a dignity of life where they have access to food, and we make sure that those prices are manageable in order for people to afford a specific standard of life that is dignified. That should be the exact same energy that we apply to sanitary products, because it's not an option for people to menstruate. It's not a negotiable. We don't have the opt-out option, anybody who menstruates, right? So I think that's a lazy argument, and I think it's one that evades the urgency and the importance of removing the tampon tax.
And it's interesting she talked about not being able to opt out, Carol, because there have been those who said if people are providing condoms for free, then why can they not provide sanitary products for free? Because it's not like sex. It's not a choice. It's something that happens every single month to about 800 million women and girls around the continent. So what do you think about countries saying they can't afford it?
Like Bertha said, it's a cop-out, because there are many steps to even take before getting to giving out free pads. We are only as good as the most vulnerable people in our society. Yeah. So if people are living in period poverty and people are living in poverty, that's only how good we are as a nation. So there are many things that can be done in terms of sensitization. There are many things that can be done in terms of vocation and teaching people how to make pads themselves and creating that option for them. But right now, people don't have that option. The government hasn't shown any interest in period poverty or treated period poverty as something that is, prioritized, that's important, that has an impact. You just have to go to a school and speak to a 15-year-old, 14-year-old. Some of them have never had pads in their lives. They don't know the impact of their menstruation on their reproductive health. They don't know what is happening there. And it goes down to the quality of education, the quality of life, the quality of life that people are living in Nigeria. So I do agree that it's a cop-out. I think that when things are important, you invest in it, you invest in research, you invest in the options you give people, you invest in changing the status quo. And I don't think that we have done that in a way that shows that, we have checked and we don't have this money, or we have checked and we can't do this. I don't think that has been done. And it's my opinion that many governments in Africa and generally all over the world do not just prioritize issues like this that are predominant, that are affecting women.
So, Carol, very quickly, research shows us that there's not enough to what's being done. It's not just enough to provide sanitary products. There's the need for water, sanitation, a safe and private place as well. All of these work towards addressing period poverty. And you've been working in this space a lot for a number of years now. Have you seen any significant positive changes, any movement towards seriously addressing the issue? Very quickly as we start wrapping up.
Honestly, yes, but not at the scale that is significant to the people that are being affected. So when we saw the numbers when we came in, was saying about 6 million girls. All of the research is showing that it's still about 6 million girls, because this is an ongoing issue that you can't, give your way out of. But so many organizations are doing important work. So many people are starting different hashtags, social movements. There was the end tax on pads Nigeria that was done by somebody online. There's so much work that's getting done, and that was discussed on the Senate floor, but it didn't really go past that. So for me, I believe that we haven't moved the needle yet, but there is so much potential to do that. And this is one of the issues that if the government prioritizes, if the government sensitizes people, there'll be more involvement even from the average person.
Yeah. All right. So ladies, as we wrap up, what is the holistic answer to addressing period poverty in our country? Some have said we could do ring fencing, where you take tax from these products and use that for something that's related to women. Or maybe remove the tax on sanitary products and then add more tax on alcohol and tobacco to make it up. Or even just target specific areas, or only give out free sanitary products in schools. Bertha, let me start with you. Namibia has made this progress. 15% tax removal is a massive amount for many young girls and women. So that is a positive step. But holistically, to solve this issue, what can we do?
I think holistically, like with most social justice issues, the long-lasting solution is really a cultural shift and a change in perceptions of menstruation particularly. Because like I said at the beginning, it's so important to frame this conversation in understanding that period poverty is largely, in part, perpetuated by a shying away on a national level, on a personal level, on a community level, shying away from menstruation, right? Because of the stigma that's attached to it. So I think a deliberate, persistent, and a long-lasting effort to deconstruct that, to normalize conversations about menstruation, to normalize its understanding as, the same thing as sneezing or having a flu, and talking about it freely and openly. I think ideally that is a social shift which would translate into our policy formulation and implementation and would drive meaningful change in the long run.
All right. And finally, Carol, the same way, holistically, how do we address the issue of period poverty?
I think we should begin addressing it from the most vulnerable in the society. So yes, free pads. Let's start with public schools, low-income areas, and then work on to policy, the stigmatization of menstruation, and just getting involved. And yes, I think largely also more representation for women in policy and government and holding public office has a big role to play in that, because more women hopefully means more women's issues are getting the attention. Yes.
Yeah. All right, thank you so much to my guests. There are definitely more parts to this conversation. As we said, there is also the hygiene poverty aspect of it. There's the sexual and reproductive health rights aspect of the conversation as well. But hopefully we have been able to touch base with the core of the issues surrounding period poverty on the continent. Thank you, Carol Omu, founder of Sanitary Aid Initiative, and Bertha Tobias, AU Youth Charter Country Representative. Thank you so much, ladies, for joining me on today's Debrief.
Thank you for having me.
All right, while the show may be over, the conversation doesn't end here. Use our social media platforms at News Central TV and the hashtag NCDebrief to share your thoughts. Until next time, I'm Tolunakwe Adelaru Balogun.